The final of the 4 macroeconomic performance goals we've been looking at is the current account of the balance of payments. The government aims for the current account to be balanced. For now, we're going to say that means imports are roughly equal to exports, although it's not quite that simple, as we'll see in a second. So first of all, what is the balance of payments? Well, the balance of payments is a record of all the transactions between one country and any other country it deals with. So every time money enters or leaves the economy from abroad, we record that in the balance of payments. But for AS, the only bit that we're really interested in is the current account of the balance of payments. And the current account is made up of 3 important things. The first, and the biggest, is exports minus imports. This is all about the value of goods and services leaving the economy. So the value of every good or service we export to a foreign country, we consider that a plus, a positive on the UK current account. The value of every good or service we import from a foreign country, that sends money out of the UK economy, and so we consider that a negative to the UK current account. This bit, that we sometimes call the balance of trade, is by far the biggest bit of the current account. So if this turns out to be negative, then the chances are the whole current account is going to be negative. The next bit, the next biggest bit, is net investment income. So that's all the money that UK firms and citizens get from loans they've made to foreign companies or shares they've bought in foreign companies. All the money that brings back in. We're not talking here about the money they paid for example, the shares in the first place. Only about the dividend, the payment they get back because they own the shares. So this is interest, profits, and dividends. So the interest that, for example, a UK citizen gets on making a loan to a French person. The profits that a UK firm might bring back from a company it's set up in France. And the dividends, or the shareholder payment, that a UK shareholder might get bringing back money into the UK from a French or German company that they own shares in. And again, this is net investment income. So anything that brings money in from abroad, that's going to be a positive. Anything that sends money from the UK away, for example, maybe Nissan with a factory in Sunderland sending money back home, well, that's going to be a negative on the UK current account. This is nearly always negative, the balance of trade. We export far more services than we import, but we import a huge number of goods. And so that means that this, the balance of trade, is pretty much always negative. Net investment income, on the other hand, tends to be positive. More money coming in than leaving, but in recent years that's been negative as well. The final one is net transfers. That's things like aid payments abroad, which obviously are negative as we give aid money to another country, or EU membership and that kind of thing. So that also is always negative. So the UK nearly always runs what we call a deficit on the current account. A deficit just means that more money is flowing out than is flowing in. So the value of all the goods and services that we import, the value of all the investment income that comes in, and the value of any aid payments and things that we might get is outweighed by the value of all the aid payments and export and imports and things that we make that send money abroad. So the UK current account is nearly always in deficit. The opposite, where you've got more money coming in than going out, is called a surplus, And that's the sort of situation that China tends to have year on year, because they export so many goods to the rest of the world. So that's a quick summary of how the current account fits together. The question is, why do we nearly always run a deficit? Well, that's a complicated question. There are lots of reasons. But there are two main reasons why we nearly always have more money going out of the UK economy than coming in when it comes to our trade. The first is high demand. We've had a recession over the last few years, but before that, we had a very long time where incomes were going up and up and up, and demand was going up and up and up. It's much easier for someone to say, I want that, than for a firm to make it. So when people demand more goods, the demand comes really quickly, but firms can't keep up with that. And so the only thing that can happen is we import those goods, or we end up with lots of inflation because there's lots of demand and not many goods around. So one of the reasons that we tend to have run a current account deficit for many years now is very high levels of consumer demand, meaning we need to import lots of things. The second reason is productivity, or lack of productivity. We produce lots of goods and services in the UK, but generally our labour productivity, the amount of hours it takes to make something, that's relatively low compared with lots of other countries. And if a firm has to pay for lots of labour hours in a product, then that pushes their price up. And that means they can't compete with foreign firms. And so people tend not to buy our exports, and we find it cheaper to buy other people's goods than our own. And so those are two reasons why we end up with a current account deficit. It's not necessarily a big problem. If we don't have a current account deficit for very long, then there's not too much money leaving the economy. And actually it can be good. It can reduce that inflation because we're bringing in more goods, and it means that we can have a greater choice of goods. So it's very hard to get bananas, for example, without importing them. But it does have downsides if it keeps going. All that money leaving the economy is money that's not in the circular flow that you may have studied already, not going to UK firms, which earns them money, which means they pay their workers more, which means they have more money, and it doesn't help keep contributing to growth. So it's not a huge problem in the short term, but in the long term, running a deficit tends to reduce growth.